Elon Musk has been running a kind of hostile takeover of the US government through his department or organization or entity, Doge. I think Musk's big assault on the government is really telling in terms of what does right-wing politics look like, particularly in relation to the role of the government and the state in the modern day and going forward. Because we all kind of have an idea of things that the government does, and yet that has been highly changeable over time. Until the beginning of maybe the 20th century, governments primarily did, having an army to defend a country, and professional standing armies actually came quite late to that. They did running a legal system, so making sure that you have courts, etc., so that people can sue one another, so that contracts can be enforced is particularly important. Governments and states, as we call them, have also tended to oversee how their country trades with others, and things like tariffs, as we're seeing a lot of in the US, or their lack thereof, and treaties. And for a lot of history, that kind of law enforcement or legal enforcement, a kind of justice role, that's mostly been what governments do. It's only really been through the 20th century that their roles have really expanded far beyond that. And some of that begins with pensions, some of that begins with schooling, and from there, kind of, things have been added. Most governments do have some role in healthcare. Most have some role in regulating economies and markets within their jurisdiction. They might look after quite a lot of education now. They might look after childcare in some respect. And not all of this stuff is free. Not all of this stuff is paid for through taxes. Sometimes it's kind of more tacit support. But over the past sort of 100 years or so, the government, the role of the state has sort of expanded, and then since the 1980s contracted a little bit again. But what we've seen over the past couple of weeks is an attempt to rapidly contract the role of governments. So Elon Musk is leading this body called Doge, which many have made the point that it is not technically a department of the US government. Departments have to be set up, agreed by Congress. The president can't just simply create a proper department. But I think there are a couple of ways to view this attack on the government. Yeah, one is just this idea that he wants the government to do less because it's expensive, and that if the government is doing less, then there's less taxes to be paid, etc. And I think that is probably part of it. But the other part is quite an extreme view of what the government should and shouldn't do. Sort of the key word of all of this is efficiency. The department is called the Department of Government Efficiency, right? On its face, this is about government waste in the sense that, the government's spending lots of money that it doesn't need to. This view that governments are kind of inherently inefficient, which has become quite a powerful view, particularly since the 1980s, since Reagan and Thatcher. And I think it's kind of become a common sense notion. I mean, Elon Musk is an excellent example of the ways in which corporations can also be hugely inefficient. I was listening to a podcast, with Ezra Klein earlier on today. Elon Musk kind of has this ability to, because he is so wealthy, because SpaceX has so much money through its government contracts, And similarly, sort of Tesla, he has this ability to just try things a bunch of times, and if the rocket explodes, that's okay because there's enough money to try it again. Whereas if NASA was doing the same thing, they wouldn't be able to do it in this way because they would be getting criticized for developing rockets in wasteful ways, right? They would be told to, do the fucking maths again, or do the math again, because they had to get it right first time and not waste all of this resource on doing this. The energy that he's bringing to this Doge job is similar to the energy that he supposedly brought to Twitter. The email subject that he put in his email to a bunch of government employees, basically telling them that if they wanted to take redundancy, they were welcome. If they weren't prepared to go like hardcore mode, like the government was about to go, was exactly the same as that which he put in the subject line when he took over Twitter back in 2022. A fork in the road, this is a change. And so there's kind of this notion of efficiency. One thing it's always worth remembering is that, like, profit in many regards is an inefficiency. The sort of theory of the pursuit of profit making companies or services or products, whatever it is, in more efficient ways is that you are trying to do the thing for cheaper, because if you do the thing for cheaper, and that might also include doing it quicker and faster and more reliably, there is less money, there is more money left over that you can keep as profit. But if you are keeping a big chunk of that, then the inefficiency hasn't particularly gone away, just one person is getting to hold on to it. Because I think it's just sort of bled into the popular consciousness. The idea that just the sort of broad idea that government is inherently wasteful, and the sense that it's just obvious that there are all of these inefficiencies. I think every so often so there is a Twitter account, and I know nothing about the person who runs this. I don't know what their political affiliations are. However, the sort of gimmick of the Twitter account is that they will quote tweet big money numbers from the news, and they will tell you for how long that amount of money would allow the NHS to run, right? So the pinned tweet here is, the Burj Khalifa is the world's tallest building. It cost 3 days and 11 hours of NHS spending. Here we go. MPs' pay set to increase 2.8% to £93,904. Would you put your life under the scrutiny of the public eye for 15 seconds of NHS spending? I presume that's the £93,000 figure. A new UK government contract for £73 million for interpretation and translation services for the NHS. This is 3 hours and 17 minutes of the NHS. And all of this sounds ridiculous, right? When you go, wow, the Burj Khalifa must have been really expensive to build. I mean, I assume there was probably some questionable employment practices involved in the building of the Burj Khalifa, but we would assume that is a very expensive thing to build, and yet all of that money could only run the NHS for 3 days and 11 hours. That makes it sound like the NHS is incredibly wasteful. A figure like this might sound ridiculous, but then you have to remember that the National Health Service is basically the main healthcare, provides most of the healthcare for an entire country of people, right? Yes, it is expensive to run. It's also massive. Like, of course it is expensive to do that. 1.3 million people get seen by someone within the NHS a day, whether that's in accident emergency or whether that's in the GP. That is equal to the entire population of Estonia. 1,600 babies are born. The NHS has more patients sleep in its beds each night than there are hotel rooms in London. It cleans an area the size of Gibraltar every day. Provides 227 meals every single minute. Yes, it's extremely expensive. However, that's because it just does a huge amount of stuff. There are also ways in which discussions of supposed inefficiency and people arguing for supposed inefficiency within organizations, government organizations like the US, ends up being less efficient. My point was that I don't know the political persuasion of this person. I would assume that they are probably a conservative of some description. However, the logic of governments are inefficient is just so widespread and so sort of common sense these days that this narrative becomes really easy to soak up. That's a really easy thing to retweet. It just makes the NHS sound ridiculous when once you put that within context, that makes a bit more sense. Rosemary's Baby Girl here also making the point, right? An efficient healthcare system also has some scary implications. One way to increase efficiency is to eliminate redundancies. Efficiency in this context often implies accepting that more people suffer from mistakes and oversights. There are some really challenging conversations and decisions to be made. One of the things that happens in the UK, and this is sort of a criticism which often gets levied at the NHS from people on the right, is this idea of death squads, right? The NHS often has to make decisions in terms of what medication it will and won't fund. Yeah, so a little while ago, this is October, I can't remember exactly when I'd read this, this story sort of circulated in the media, which was that the NHS had made the decision that it wouldn't pay for this drug which slows Alzheimer's because the benefits on either individuals or on a population level of giving it out and the sort of cost benefit of paying for this drug just wasn't high enough to go, well, we won't pay for something else, right? And there is a kind of utilitarianness to this, which I think all of us probably find a little challenging in one way or another. There's sort of an element of effective altruism to it. One of the sort of key things about effective altruism is that if you want to donate some money to charity, donate it to a charity which gives out mosquito nets in countries where there are high levels of malaria, because the cost benefit to a charity buying a mosquito net, which are pretty cheap to buy, to the fact that the person that uses that will then who otherwise might have been bitten by a mosquito, they will get additional years worth of their lives, whereas if you donate it to Alzheimer research, it will make some difference to someone's life, but not to the same extremity. I think it's fair enough that I think most people have some kind of difficult feeling when it comes to that stuff. And yet, at the other extent of it, that is an efficiency question. And on the face of it, Elon Musk's kind of attack on the US government, is this question of efficiency. And it's this question of him coming in as this star CEO. It's him coming in as this successful businessman with an eye for doing things well and quickly and efficiently, and applying that same lens to a government. And this is kind of the second aspect of this, right? If one aspect is just about the saving of the money and that side of the efficiency, the second aspect is less about the saving money itself and more about the mindset. What if we had the mindset of a startup? What if we had a startup nation? One of the interesting factors about Doge has been these sort of really young employees, the young, inexperienced engineers aiding Elon Musk's government takeover, says Victoria Elliott here. There's sort of people who have been either officially or unofficially kind of seconded from Elon Musk's other businesses, all under 25, were kind of there to shake things up, to disrupt, in the language of Silicon Valley. And so another aspect of this is this aspect of, what if government could be run more like business, make decisions more quickly, look for ways of doing things that no one else is doing them, viewing the people that it provides services and stuff to, not as voters or not as people who are under its jurisdiction, but as customers, clients, that it has to serve well and respond instantaneously to. But this second aspect of efficiency, I think, is also in there. And that has big questions for democracy. Because democracy is kind of slow. Like any system that is going to try and govern lots of people in a way that, at least on the surface, is meant to reflect the will of some of those people and is meant to, even amongst those who have not actively chosen a particular direction and option, is at least meant to kind of try and take them along with them. That is kind of slow. It takes a long time. Often too long, right? And all of the lobbying and the party shenanigans that go on, often that means that things take even longer than they might do. We see really popular policies which don't get through because there are all these obstacles to them getting through, which maybe don't need to exist. There's a famous kind of chart from the US. Okay, it was a study from Princeton University, basically suggested that how popular a bill is in America has zero impact on whether or not it will pass. You're back there.
This axis here represents public support for any given idea. On the left at 0% are ideas that not a single American wants. On the right at 100% are ideas that everyone supports. This axis represents the likelihood of Congress passing a law that reflects any of these ideas, from a 0 to a 100% chance. On this graph, an ideal republic would look like this. If 50% of the public supports an idea, there's a 50% chance of it becoming law. If 80% of us support something, there's an 80% chance. You get the idea. Now, most Americans would probably agree that, with a few exceptions, we should be as close to this ideal as possible. Unfortunately, the way America actually works doesn't even come close. Take an idea that nobody supports, literally nobody.
So this is the line of the correlation between public support for a bill in the US and its likelihood of passing, and it's sort of basically a flat line. If anything, there are points here early in the line where it is higher at near zero support that a bill will get through than it is when something is really popular. So we also make democracy less efficient through all kinds of things, like whether it's lobbying, whether it's through politicians who otherwise would be less popular than they are, being able to get lots of donations to get their way through, whether it's political parties as institutions being able to support or block various candidates and various bills, etc. However, in basically any democracy, decisions are going to be slow and are going to take a reasonably long amount of time. So I think the third part of this that is kind of being missed, maybe, is actually that deeper question of a disagreement about what the role of the government should be. If we look back at, the late 1970s, late 1980s, and, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan have their special relationship, and they both decide that they want to really change the politics of their countries. And there's some sort of precedent for this. Barry Goldwater's run at president in the United States kind of laid some of the groundwork. There were, Hayek's work had been spreading throughout. But the core belief of neoliberalism, which is the label that we often give to the politics and economics of Thatcher and Reagan, as David Harvey says, apparently, in A Brief History of Neoliberalism, in theory, and the theory of neoliberalism has always been slightly different to the practice, but the neoliberal state should favour strong individual private property rights, the rule of law, and the institutions of freely functioning markets and free trade. And, in the neoliberal wet dream of a state, what the state, of a world, what the state should provide is basically just those things, right? So a legal system so that people can sue each other if they renege on a contract, because capitalism needs a certainty that if people sign a contract, they're going to stick with it, whether that's two companies working together or whether that's you signing a contract with your landlord, right? If you sign a contract with your landlord, then the sort of perfect neoliberal capitalist society, needs there to be a system where if you don't pay your rent, then you can be in trouble for that. As part of that, probably like a reasonably strong army, not necessarily to fight with other capitalist states, but to fight with anyone that might throw off the smooth functioning of the market. So that might be the communists back in the Cold War, but it also might be ISIS, who also are sort of broadly sorry, I don't think ISIS are anti-capitalist, but like who would at least be a hindrance to the operation of a free market. But beyond that, probably not a huge amount. I guess police, so that if someone tries to smash a shop up, they can be arrested. Like, in the ideal sort of neoliberal vision, there's probably not a huge amount of additional stuff that the state would do. When Thatcher and Reagan came in, however, they were faced with these post-World War II governments that did a huge amount of stuff. Right, governments that were involved in running, in the UK, running the electricity and the water, and across the world, governments that ran airlines, governments that owned car manufacturers, governments which provided schooling for young people, which provided pensions. The idea of an old age pension was a really early sort of expansion of the role of the state into some of that additional stuff. And so what they were able to achieve on that front was more limited. I don't know to what extent they did or didn't believe that they, or wish they could have gone further, like as two individuals. Beyond the sort of more immediate questions of efficiency, in the sense of the government spending less money, and efficiency in the sense of like having that hustle culture mindset, that kind of move fast and break things, Silicon Valley mindset within the government, is also this much deeper question of what should the government do. And the approach that both Trump and Musk have taken so far is very extreme. So last week, Donald Trump signed an executive order, issued a memo effectively trying to just block funding for just a huge amount of things. With a real sort of, the government should just stop spending any money until we figure out what's going on kind of attitude to things. Let's just freeze the bank account, and we can see what's happening, and we can then start to resume spending some money once we've got a bit more of an idea of what's happening in place. Which of course had the potential, had it not very quickly been blocked by a judge, could have been quite disastrous. Again, as we saw, in the same way that we were talking about the NHS a minute ago and saying, well, the NHS in the UK spends a lot of money because it's massive. The US government spends a lot of money because it's absolutely enormous. And so just being like, yeah, we're probably not going to spend any money. I mean, we've still seen that USAID, which is the kind of foreign development fund that the US federal government has previously funded, has similarly has continued to be paused. But so there is this really big question in terms of the extreme approach they're taking, where it feels like they are beginning to ask the question, actually, how far down the route could we go of just going, well, what if the government just didn't do a lot of this stuff? Trump has talked about disbanding the Department for Education. I think he described, here we go, here's the quote I was looking for. So Trump said of Linda McMahon, who is his presumed education secretary, I think she's still got to get through, but he said that he wants her to put herself out of a job. Which, to clarify, as I understand it, and I'm no expert on the kind of relationship between federal and state government in the US, as I understand it, schools themselves are sort of run by lower levels of governance, whether that's the states or counties. And so it's not that all of the schools would suddenly close down, but that there would be sort of no oversight from the US government. And from the particular view of the kind of Trumpites, or whatever, what you want to call them, Trumpists, the sort of political right in the US, and particularly the religious right in the US, a lot of that particular anger at the education system is that, the First Amendment in the US means that it sort of limits how sort of unified schools can be in their kind of religious teaching. It's a little bit different to in France, where doing religious stuff in school is like completely forbidden. But that's another quite extreme attempt. I mean, there's a list here of all of the things that Elon Musk and Doge have done so far. One of the focuses has just been massively reducing the number of employees, as he did at Twitter. Elon Musk basically just said, anyone who wants to quit is welcome to do so, and we will give you a deal to do so. We've seen rollbacks on so-called DEI initiatives. What's interesting though is that support for Doge is not hugely high. And like Thatcher and Reagan were in the 1980s, where they could only go so far in terms of what they could strip back and what they could privatize, Trump and Musk and their allies are going to continue to be limited by what people's expectations are of a state, of a government in the modern day. Because there are things we no longer expect a state to do that we previously might have, right? When Thatcher and Reagan came into power, people in many countries would have expected their government to not provide their energy in terms of it being free, but to run the energy system. A lot of people would have expected their government to run the water network, to dig for coal and all of these kinds of things, and to own state-owned enterprises. These days, those things are less within our boundaries of what we tend to assume that a government would do. Some of us might like them to do some of that stuff, but the person on the street would often be like, oh, that seems like a sort of strange idea, maybe, that all the trains should be run by the government or something. And while 50 years later, those shifts in expectations of what a government can and should do does give Musk and Trump the ability to go much further than Reagan and Thatcher were able to do. There are still quite a lot of expectations that people have. So the US government, the US does not have sort of universal healthcare, but it does spend a huge amount of money on healthcare for certain groups of people who are provided with support for the healthcare. It has a big pensions bill for older people who will be expecting their state pension. And there are all these things which, in a dream world, Elon Musk might wish he could shave off to achieve that really sort of core, tiny government which doesn't really do a huge amount of things. However, people still have a lot of those expectations, and how far can they go in achieving that incredibly small government that only does things which serve the interests of multi-billionaires? I don't know. But again, that is one of those questions about, what should and shouldn't governments do. And I think that is going to be one of the big questions of the next few years, both in the US and in other countries, right? We have the potential, and I think in part depending on how well Donald Trump does in the US and how things do or don't change here in the UK, there is the potential that we have a Prime Minister Nigel Farage, right, with a reform government whose mandate would be similar enough to Donald Trump's in the US. AfD in Germany are doing really well. Elon Musk, has spoken at one of their events. The Front National continue to do well in France. All of these have a quite far right, but also quite libertarian view of what governments should and shouldn't do. In fact, it's one of the things that they do want it to do is to, have strong borders to stop immigrants coming in and to, do big deportations. Trump has big deportation goals, which is always the sort of key hypocrisy, I guess, of actually existing libertarianism, is that money and goods and services should always be able to easily move across borders. However, people should not. And that is because someone like Trump, someone like Nigel Farage, other kind of, your Marine Le Pen's, your Alternative for Deutschland, they they kind of need that to have a voting base, right? So although they're kind of slim in terms of government in other respects, they do want that strong defense of borders. They do want a big army, because actually having a big national military means that you can exert influence in other countries, which is good for business. And the core, while the theory might be a small state, the practice is often a state which is, well, is always a state which is perfectly shaped to serve the needs of those who have control over it, right? I mean, Elon Musk wants NASA to pay SpaceX to build stuff to be able to go to Mars. He probably doesn't want a huge amount of efficiency savings there.